The millionaire's daughter was rejected by the doctors, until the maid did the impossible. The room was so white that even the light felt cold. Amid the scent of disinfectant and the soft hum of machines, Emma Lewis sat perfectly still, her clear eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if waiting for something the world no longer believed in. At only 9 years old, she had just heard the words no child should ever hear. "We've done everything we could." Beside her stood a man in a gray suit, motionless. David Lewis, a renowned architect who once designed towers that reached the sky, now bowed before something no blueprint could ever fix: helplessness. Money, prestige, the empire he built, all seemed meaningless echoes against the sterile walls of that heavy, airless room. The thick curtains shut out the afternoon sun, casting everything in a pale, fading light. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. The world had narrowed to 2 breaths, one shallow, one broken. When David left the hospital, the sky outside had turned the color of steel. He drove back to the oceanfront mansion, where the rhythm of the waves matched the memories he tried to forget. As the gate slid open, a woman stood waiting. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her hands clutched a small wooden box, its varnish worn by time. Yet her eyes shone with something stronger than logic: faith. David glanced at her briefly, assuming she was another housekeeper hired by his staff. He didn't know that inside that weathered box lay something science couldn't explain, and within that woman lived the answer to what he believed was gone forever: hope. The Lewis mansion stood high on a cliff overlooking the sea, a monument of glass and steel, flawless, cold, proud against the salty wind. From the outside, it looked like perfection. Inside, it was suffocatingly quiet, not the peace of calmness, but the silence of emptiness. David Lewis had built this house as a symbol of his success. He once told colleagues it was the home of his dreams. But over time, it had become more like a tomb wrapped in elegance. White walls, marble floors, and ceilings so high that every footstep echoed back as loneliness itself. Emma lived on the 2nd floor, in a room where morning light passed through thick glass, soft but distant. Her room overflowed with stuffed animals, books, and toys she no longer touched. Her days followed a schedule marked by bells: breakfast at 7, tutoring at 9, rest at noon, medical checkups in the afternoon. Everything precise, everything perfect, everything lifeless. David left home before sunrise, as always. His car glided through the gate, leaving behind a silence longer than the road ahead. He buried himself in meetings and blueprints, as if enough work could drown the quiet fear growing inside him. By nightfall, he returned to a kitchen still lit but empty, a home still standing but hollow. The only one who noticed the sound of the wind slipping through the window frames was Grace Miller. She cleaned quietly, her gaze resting on a framed photo, a smiling little girl in her mother's arms. Laura, the woman David had lost. Grace touched the glass gently. "She looks just like Laura," she whispered. Since her arrival, Grace had spoken little, but she saw everything. The way Emma walked down the hall without a word. The way she ate alone, the spoon tapping against porcelain like the loneliest sound in the world. The way light filled the house, but never truly reached the people inside. One morning, Grace opened the kitchen window to let the ocean breeze in. The scent of salt and wind fluttered through the white curtains. She smiled faintly. Though this house felt frozen, she knew something could still thaw it. Not wealth, not medicine, not science, but the presence of a heart willing to love. And Grace, with no title or degree to her name, understood she hadn't come here just to clean. She had come to warm a home that had forgotten how to love. The next morning, as the first light shimmered over the sea, Grace Miller was already awake. She had always loved that hour, when the world was still quiet, and a person could almost hear their own heart. In the wide kitchen, she boiled water, made tea, and let the sound of distant waves fill the silence. Upstairs, Emma's room remained still, as if time had yet to begin. Grace glanced toward the staircase, the spot where the little girl often sat in the afternoons, knees drawn to her chest, staring out the window. Emma had the kind of gaze that belonged to someone far older than her years, the gaze of a soul that had already known loss. That afternoon, while dusting the long hallway, Grace saw Emma pass by. The girl said nothing. Her backpack slipped from her shoulder, scattering notebooks and pencils across the marble floor. A loose sheet of paper drifted toward Grace's feet. She bent down and picked it up. It was a pencil drawing, a small cottage with smoke curling from the chimney and two people holding hands at the door. At the bottom, written in a trembling child's hand, were the words, "My dream." Grace smiled softly. "That's a lovely drawing. Did you make it yourself?" Emma looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "It's just a dream. There's no house like that for me." "Nothing from the heart is ever foolish, Emma," Grace said, folding the paper gently as if it were treasure. "Dreams aren't made to be believed. They're made to remind us that we still want to live." The girl looked at her, a faint flicker of light in her eyes, before turning away again. Grace didn't say another word. She simply laid a gentle hand on the child's shoulder, a touch warm enough to plant something small, but living in a frozen heart. That night, in her tiny attic room, Grace took the wooden box from the shelf. She brushed the thin layer of dust off the lid and opened it slowly. Inside were fragments of a lifetime, faded photographs, a worn rag doll, and a picture of two young women embracing and laughing at the camera. One of them was Laura Lewis. The other was Grace herself. Grace whispered softly, her voice trembling, "Laura, I've kept my promise. I found your little girl." In the dim light of her small room, Grace held the photo in her hands, her eyes lost in a faraway time. The smell of salt from the sea mingled with her memories, opening a door to the past. More than 30 years ago, in a small town nestled among Oregon's pine forests, two 17-year-old girls met on a windy afternoon. Grace Miller, the daughter of a humble carpenter, kind-hearted and steady, and Laura Bennett, a city girl who had just moved there, her eyes bright as autumn sunlight. Their first conversation happened by the river, when Laura was trying to fix a small wooden boat blown over by the wind. Grace knelt to help, her calloused hands piecing it back together. Laura smiled, a smile Grace would remember for the rest of her life. From that day on, they were inseparable. They studied together, shared secrets, and dreamed aloud about the future. Laura dreamed of cities and skylines. Grace dreamed of a small house, a garden, and laughter around the dinner table. Under the great oak by the river, they made a promise. No matter where life takes us, we'll never lose each other. But time, as always, carried them away. Laura left town at 18. Her first letter was full of excitement. "Grace, I found a job. Everything here is bright and huge. I feel like I can touch the future." For years, the letters kept coming. Laura wrote about her work, the city, and the man she fell in love with. David Lewis, a talented architect with calm eyes always fixed on unfinished buildings. Then came the 12th letter, and her tone had changed. "You know, Grace, sometimes I feel lonely surrounded by all this beauty. David is good, but work has swallowed him whole. Our house looks like a magazine photo. Perfect, but cold. When Emma was born, Laura wrote again, "She's my sunshine. But sometimes I fear that light might fade if I'm not strong enough to hold it." Then, the letters stopped. Grace wrote back again and again, but there was no reply. One autumn morning, a distant relative called from the city. Laura Bennett, Lewis, died in a car accident. The world inside Grace collapsed. She sat on her porch, holding Laura's last letter, crying until the sunrise came. In that letter, Laura had written only one plea. "If anything ever happens to me, Grace, promise me one thing. Don't let my daughter grow up without knowing what real love feels like." Years passed. Grace's children grew up and left home. One day, while cleaning the attic, she found the wooden box again. The box holding all those memories. And when her eyes fell upon a newspaper ad, "Live-in housekeeper needed, 45 Seacliff Drive, San Francisco," her heart skipped a beat. That address? The Lewis family home. Grace understood then. This was not coincidence. It was a calling, a chance to fulfill a promise made under an Oregon sky long ago, and to mend what fate had once torn apart. That summer, the sky over San Francisco never cleared. A thin veil of fog hung over the city like a soft sadness, and inside the Lewis mansion by the sea, another kind of cloud was quietly falling. Emma had begun to grow tired, but no one realized what that really meant. At first it was small things, long yawns in the morning, skipped breakfasts. "I'm just a little tired," she said, her voice fragile as air. David forced a smile, smoothing her hair. "You've been studying too hard? We'll take the weekend off." But when the weekend came, she no longer had the strength to walk down the beach like before. He took her to doctors. One said anemia, another said stress. All of them offered comfort dressed as answers, and David wanted to believe them. He wanted to believe it was nothing. Then, one Monday morning, the phone rang. The teacher's voice trembled. "Mr. Lewis." Emma fainted in class. The world tilted. He drove through the coastal fog like a man fleeing from something he couldn't name. In the emergency room, white light poured down on Emma's pale face. He stood frozen, listening to the mechanical beep of the monitors. Steady, sterile, and distant, as if belonging to another world. That afternoon, the doctor called him into her office. She was calm, professional, and heartbreakingly gentle. "We've done multiple tests. Your daughter might have a rare congenital immune disorder. It's complex and unpredictable." David frowned, his voice unsteady. "Can it be cured?" The doctor hesitated. "We'll do everything we can, but..." That "but" was a blade, thin, quiet, and devastating. He looked down at the papers covered in charts and numbers he couldn't decipher. At the bottom, a line stood out in black ink. Prognosis. Limited. When he walked out, the sky had turned to steel. Sitting in his car, hands gripping the wheel, he bowed his head. The man who once built cities suddenly realized he couldn't rebuild his own daughter's life. He wanted to scream, to break the silence swallowing him whole. But all that came out was a whisper. "If you were here, Laura, what would you do?" No answer came. Only the sea striking the rocks again and again. Patient, merciless. The weeks that followed blurred together. Corridors, consultations, prescriptions, endless bills. He called specialists from every corner of the country, offered any amount of money, but every answer sounded the same. "We'll try." And no guarantees. Emma grew weaker. Her hair fell. Her voice turned to a whisper. One night she looked up at him with those wide, luminous eyes. "Daddy, will I get better?" He couldn't speak. He held her small, cold hand. "I promise, sweetheart. I'll never stop trying." She smiled faintly. "I know." Later that night, he closed her door quietly and walked down the long hallway. His shadow stretched across the marble floor. He didn't notice Grace, standing in the dark at the end of the hall, hands clasped tightly. She watched him go, her heart heavy with understanding. Back in her room, she placed the old wooden box on the table and lit a small candle. The flame trembled, reflecting in the photograph of Laura's smiling face. "Laura," she whispered, "I think it's time. Your little girl needs love more than any medicine in the world." The next morning, the oceanfront house was so quiet that even the ticking of the clock could be heard. David had left early, as always, running from the fear that followed him everywhere. Only Grace and Emma remained. Grace brewed tea in the kitchen, the sound of boiling water soft and steady. The scent of mint filled the air, warm and calm. When she carried the tray upstairs, Emma was by the window, a book open on her lap, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the sea. "Have a little something," Grace said gently, setting down orange juice and slices of bread. "I'm not hungry," Emma murmured. "I know," Grace replied softly. "But sometimes we eat so our hearts have enough strength to feel sad, don't we?" The girl looked up, surprised, and for a moment, warmth flickered in her eyes. Grace sat beside her, said nothing more. Instead, she opened the small wooden box and took out a photograph, its edges frayed with time. Two young women smiling under an oak tree. "Do you know who this is?" Emma shook her head. "This is your mother, and me." The world seemed to still. You knew my mom?" Grace nodded, her voice tender. "We were best friends. She once told me that if anything ever happened, I should come and tell you about the things money could never buy." Emma stared at the photo for a long time. "No one ever talks about her. Dad doesn't like to." "It's not because he doesn't love her," Grace whispered. "It's because sometimes pain is too big to touch." Silence hung between them until Emma finally spoke. "She looked so happy." "She was," Grace smiled. "Back then, we dreamed of the simplest life, a small house, a garden full of sunlight. Your mother believed that wherever there was love, even the smallest place could be paradise." Something inside Emma broke open. Tears slid down her cheeks, quiet and real. "Did she ever say anything about me?" Grace nodded. "She said you'd have her heart, one that loves, forgives, and always finds light in the dark." From that morning on, Emma's room was never completely silent again. Each day, Grace came with new stories of Laura, climbing apple trees, burning pies, watching stars, and talking about the future. Each story was a small beam of sunlight, melting the frost around the child's soul. One afternoon, Grace brought the box to her bed. "Your mother asked me to keep this safe. I think it's time it returned to you." Inside was a little rag doll, its yarn hair red, its dress a soft shade of lavender. At its feet, written in fading ink, "For Emma, love that never ends." Emma clutched the doll to her chest, tears spilling freely. "Do you think she knew I'd need it?" Grace smiled. "I think she knew everything, my dear." That afternoon, for the first time in months, Emma ate her meal and laughed. A bright, fragile laugh that filled the room like birdsong. When David came home, he froze at the doorway. Laughter. Real laughter. His daughter sat up in bed, cheeks rosy again, holding the doll, and beside her Grace. the candlelight glinting in her eyes like a quiet miracle. Later that night, when Emma was asleep, David found Grace in the kitchen, washing cups. "I don't know what you told her," he said softly, "but thank you." That night, in a house once frozen by silence, the lamps no longer burned just to illuminate. They burned to warm. That night passed slowly, leaving behind the lingering warmth of Emma's last smile. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows, carrying the scent of sea salt and freshly baked bread. David woke later than usual, his mind haunted by something unfamiliar yet comforting. A faint trace of hope he thought he'd buried long ago. As he climbed the stairs, he heard laughter coming from Emma's room, a soft, bell-like sound that made him stop midway. How long had it been since he'd heard that sound? He pushed the door open gently. Inside, Emma sat propped up against her pillows, color returning to her cheeks. Across from her, Grace held an old letter, her voice calm and warm. "And when we watched the stars," she was saying, "Laura told me each of us has our own. It shines brightest when we dare to believe in something good." Emma smiled, her eyes glowing like she'd just found her own star. But the smile vanished the moment she saw her father at the door. David stepped in, his tone sharp, instinctive, the voice of a man used to control. "What are you doing with my daughter?" The room froze. Grace slowly folded the letter, her eyes steady. "Just telling her about her mother." David's gaze hardened. "Who gave you the right to do that? Who are you to interfere in my family?" Emma's voice trembled as she held up a photograph from the bedside table. "Dad, look. This is Mom and Mrs. Grace. They were friends." He took the photo from her hands. Time had yellowed the edges, but there was no mistaking it. Laura, young and radiant, arm around Grace, both smiling under an oak tree. The sight hit him like a cold wind. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Where did you get this?" "From Laura herself," Grace replied softly. "She sent it to me, along with these letters. I kept them for more than 10 years, waiting for the right time to give them back." David's jaw tightened. "Do you really think these stories, these sentimental letters, can help her?" "This is an illness. Love doesn't change blood results." Grace met his gaze, calm but unwavering. "Maybe not. But love can make your daughter want to live one more day. Long enough to see a miracle." The words hung in the air, light as breath, heavy as truth. David turned away, swallowing the lump in his throat. "That's enough," he muttered. "I don't want to hear more." He walked out, closing the door gently behind him. Inside, Emma's voice broke the silence. "Is Dad angry?" Grace stroked her hair, smiling softly. "No, sweetheart. He's just scared. Sometimes people fear losing hope more than losing anything else." David walked down the hall, his footsteps echoing faintly. In his study, he sank into the chair, not bothering to turn on the light. The room was dim, the sea breeze slipping through the window crack. On the desk sat an old family photo. Laura holding baby Emma, his own awkward smile beside them. The emptiness hit him like a wave. "Love doesn't change blood results," he whispered again. But this time, he heard the echo of what followed. "But it can make her want to live one more day." He closed his eyes and saw his daughter's laughter that morning, the light in her face as she heard stories of her mother. For the first time in months, he realized something no treatment had managed to restore: her will to live. Opening his eyes, he looked toward the foggy horizon, and there, faint against the daylight, one stubborn star still shimmered. He whispered, almost to himself, Maybe. She's right. The next afternoon, a gentle sea breeze drifted through the window, carrying the scent of salt and sunlight. Emma looked stronger, her face brighter, her smile fragile yet real. Grace sat beside her, the familiar wooden box resting on her lap. "Would you like to see what's inside?" she asked softly. Emma nodded, eyes curious. Grace lifted the lid. Inside were objects arranged carefully, like fragments of time frozen in place. On top lay a letter, its paper yellowed and fragile. Laura's handwriting slanted delicately across the page. "She wrote this during her first year in the city," Grace said, her voice trembling slightly. "She said the city was beautiful, but strange, and sometimes so lonely she could hear her own heartbeat." She began to read aloud, her voice warm but breaking at the edges. "Dear Grace, sometimes I look at these buildings that reach the clouds and think maybe people build them just to hide the emptiness inside. The lights here never go out, but my heart feels darker than ever. If I ever forget who I am, promise me you'll remind me how I used to laugh beneath the oak tree back home." Emma sat silently, fingers clutching her blanket. Grace folded the letter carefully and set it aside. "Your mother was strong," she said, "but she knew what it meant to be lonely, just like you." Emma hugged her rag doll closer, Luna, already a small heartbeat against her chest. Grace smiled. "Your mother made her by hand when she was little. She believed everyone needs a friend to tell their stories to, even if it's just a doll." Emma smiled faintly, hugging the doll to her chest. "She had a real friend too," she said softly. "You." Grace chuckled, her eyes glistening. "Maybe so." Finally, from the bottom of the box, Grace pulled out a small, worn notebook bound in faded leather. When she opened it, the faint scent of vanilla rose from its pages. On the first line, in Laura's handwriting, were the words, "Mom's corn cake, the best in the world." Emma giggled. "She was funny. Can you teach me to make it?" Grace's eyes lit up. "Only if you help me sift the flour." That afternoon, the kitchen, once silent and cold, filled with laughter. Emma perched on a high stool, clumsily sifting cornmeal while Grace stirred the batter, telling stories of her mother between smiles. The smell of butter, sugar, and milk blended into the warm air. When the cake came out golden and steaming, Emma clapped her hands. "It smells like happiness," she said. Grace laughed. "That's exactly what it is, sweetheart. The scent of happiness we thought we'd forgotten." Just then, the front door opened. David stepped in, removing his glasses, and froze at the sight before him. His daughter glowing in the sunlight, holding a doll in her arms, and on the table, a steaming golden cake. "What did your mother call this again?" Grace asked softly. Emma grinned. "The best corn cake in the world." David walked forward slowly, the sweet aroma pulling him backward in time. Laura had baked this same cake for him on their first night as newlyweds. He remembered her laughter, the warmth of that tiny kitchen, the promise of forever in her smile. "Would you like to try some?" Grace asked gently. He sat down, picked up a slice, and took a bite. The taste flooded him with memory. Home, love, and everything he thought he'd lost. He looked at Emma, crumbs on her lips, laughing. For the first time in years, David Lewis didn't eat dinner alone. The next morning, the sky was clearer than it had been in months. Sunlight streamed through the trees, painting golden patches across the floor. Emma woke early, her face glowing, her eyes bright with a spark of joy that had long been absent. Grace brought breakfast upstairs, but the girl was already dressed. Floral dress, hair tied neatly, Luna the doll in her arms. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" "Much better," Emma smiled, sunlight in her voice. "It's such a beautiful day. Can we go outside?" Grace hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "If you promise to wear your jacket, I'll ask your father." That afternoon, the three of them drove to the park by the lake. Laura's favorite place when she was alive. The air smelled of fresh water and grass. Emma walked slowly, but her steps were steady, her hand in Grace's. They settled on the grass near the water's edge, where the lake mirrored the sky. David spread out the picnic blanket, arranged sandwiches and fruit like a quiet ritual. Emma slipped off her shoes and dipped her feet into the cool water. She laughed, her voice bubbling like the ripples spreading across the surface. "Is it cold, honey?" David asked. "No, Dad. It feels like life." Grace watched them, smiling softly. Then she turned to David. "Sometimes what needs healing isn't the body, but the bond that holds us together." He didn't reply. He only watched his daughter, her laughter, her joy, the simple miracle of her being there. For years he'd chased everything grand, forgetting the small things, a touch, a look, a moment shared. He swallowed hard, a silent acknowledgement rising inside him. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out an old, sealed envelope. The paper was faded with age. "Laura sent this to me 3 days before she passed," she said quietly. "I never had the courage to open it. Until now." She handed it to David. He sat beside her. Emma leaned closer. Grace unfolded the letter carefully and began to read, her voice trembling with love. "Dear Grace, if I'm no longer here, please take care of my daughter's soul. Tell her that love is the only thing truly worth living for. Teach her to believe that even when the world changes, love never disappears. And if you can, tell David he doesn't need to build the world. He just needs to be there for her." When Grace finished, silence wrapped around them. Only the whisper of wind rippled the water's surface. Emma's shoulders shook as she lowered her head, tears spilling freely. "Mom, she knew, didn't she?" David's voice cracked as he sank to his knees before her. "I'm sorry, Emma. I thought I could buy happiness, that money could protect you. But all you ever needed was me. Right here." Emma threw her arms around him, holding on tight. Their tears mixed, falling into the shimmering lake. Grace watched, eyes blurred, hands clutching the folded letter. One tear slipped down her cheek, but her smile glowed through it. She whispered, almost to the breeze itself, "Laura, I've kept my promise." On the water's surface, gentle ripples spread, reflecting 3 figures sitting close: a father, a daughter, and the woman who had brought them back to each other. The sunlight shimmered across the lake, golden and alive, as if love itself had brushed its hand over their world. That afternoon, as they returned from the park, the house seemed to breathe again. Sunlight poured through the windows, casting a warm glow on the walls that had once felt so cold. Emma ran to the window, her steps still weak but full of life. "Dad, can we plant flowers in the yard? Like the ones by the lake?" David smiled. "If you promise to rest after, we'll plant a whole garden." "Really? Really?" Such a simple promise. Yet for David, it felt like the truest vow he'd ever made. One morning, David took Emma to her medical checkup, his heart heavy with quiet hope. He didn't dare expect much, but something inside him whispered that change was coming. Dr. Turner, who had followed Emma's case for months, stared at the latest test results, brow furrowed. Then she looked up, eyes wide with something between disbelief and wonder. "Mr. Lewis," she said carefully, "I may be misreading this, but Emma's immune markers are improving, slowly but consistently. Her body is responding." David blinked. "But you said it couldn't be reversed." "In theory, no," she replied. "But medicine can only explain so much. The rest, we call spirit, or maybe a miracle." He turned toward Emma, sitting on the chair, playing with her rag doll, smiling softly. A lump rose in his throat. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if the words were meant for the doctor or for something greater. On the drive home, the wind brushed through the open window. Emma looked up and asked quietly, "Dad, does this mean I'm getting better?" He didn't answer right away. He stroked her hair, his voice trembling. "You're teaching me something, Emma. That we don't have to win to keep living. Sometimes, when love is enough, the miracle finds us." When they arrived home, Grace was watering the garden. Emma ran to her, arms outstretched. "Grandma Grace, the doctor said I'm getting better." Grace set the watering can down and hugged her tightly. "I know, sweetheart. I've seen it in your eyes every single day." David stood back, watching them. The breeze carried the scent of soil, flowers, and life, the kind of simple beauty he'd forgotten to notice. In that quiet moment, he understood. Some things can't be measured by science or money. A smile, a touch, unconditional love. Weeks later, the hospital confirmed it. Emma's recovery continued. Her numbers climbed. Dr. Turner admitted, "We don't have a medical explanation, but clearly something changed. Maybe her faith, maybe her love." That night, David stepped out onto the balcony, the stars scattered bright above him. In his hands was the letter Laura had written before she died. He read the final lines once more. "If you're reading this, I may be gone. But I believe the love you give our daughter will save her. Not with medicine, but with your heart." He closed the letter, tears blurring his vision. Looking up at the sky, he whispered, "You were right, Laura. Love saved her. And it saved me, too." Inside, Emma's laughter echoed through the halls. The house that once held its breath now exhaled light, as if Laura had never truly left. She lived in the child's smile, in Grace's gentle voice, and in the quiet light that love had finally brought home. Time passed like a quiet breath. Winter faded, and spring returned. In the Lewis garden, rows of golden sunflowers bloomed, turning toward the sun as if smiling at life itself. In the middle of that garden, Emma ran barefoot through the grass, her laughter bright and clear, carried by the sea breeze. Her brown hair fluttered, her cheeks glowed, no trace left of the fragile child who once lay in a hospital bed. David stood on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, his gaze following her with quiet joy. He still worked, but not as before. He had learned to come home early, to share dinner, to laugh, to listen to the small wonders of childhood he had once ignored. One evening, Emma sat at the kitchen table doing her homework. "Dad," she asked, "do you think Mom would be happy if she could see us now?" David smiled softly. "She is happy, sweetheart. Right now. You're living the life she always wanted for you, one filled with joy." On the living room wall, Laura's portrait hung at the center, surrounded by smaller frames, not to mourn, but to remember and smile. Each morning, sunlight passed across the glass, making her face glow with warmth and grace. Grace still lived with them, no longer a housekeeper, but family. The keeper of memories, the bridge between past and present. Emma called her Grandma Grace, and every time she did, Grace's eyes glistened, though her smile never faded. The house that had once been silent now pulsed with life. The sound of laughter, of piano keys David bought for Emma, of spoons clinking in the kitchen as she and Grace baked their world's best corn cake. Every time that familiar scent filled the air, it felt as if Laura had returned, sitting quietly nearby, smiling. Months later, David founded the Laura Foundation, dedicated to helping children with rare diseases. At the opening ceremony, he spoke to the audience with a trembling voice. "There was a time I believed money was the only power that mattered. But now I know. Real power lies in love. The love of a mother, a friend, and a child showed me what a true miracle is." Grace sat in the back row, holding Emma's hand, eyes shining with tears of pride. She knew Laura was there, not in body, but in spirit, in every heartbeat that love had touched. That night, the three of them sat in the garden. The sky glittered with stars, the air scented with blooming flowers. "Dad," Emma said, gazing upward, "I think Mom's watching us." David squeezed her hand gently. "And she's smiling, because we found our way back to each other." Grace looked at them, her hand resting on the old letter she still kept close, the one Laura had written so long ago. There was nothing left undone. The promise had been kept, and love had done what no medicine could. It had saved them all.